Dr. Michael Rousell, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to the show.
Well, it's really my privilege to do that. I saw your YouTube. I'll be putting a link to the YouTube in the show notes so people can look forward to that. It was a good introduction for me. Got me excited about. Hey, I gotta interview this guy, and great stage presence. As a presenter, lots of energy. And so we're going to be discussing your book and also your work in general, because this has been at least 30 years of in the making of a career. So the main title is The Power of Surprise. And I think you've got a copy there, maybe that you can hold up so people get a sense of it. Okay, it's nice. How fat is it? Let's see the thickness. Whoa, respectable. Okay, maybe a couple hundred pages, right?
230, I think.
Okay, yeah, I was working off the PDF, and so that's why I need to ask about this. So let's talk about surprise for starters. In the book, you make the point that there are many different kinds of surprise. And you say some are good and some are bad. Maybe you can run us through some of your main examples of the kinds of surprises that come to us as human beings.
Well, when I ask somebody, what do you think of when you think of surprise? They'll say, "Well, a surprise party. I was surprised when my parents got divorced." If I'm asking young people. I was surprised by that car that zoomed by and startled me. And so they talk about surprises as moments that disrupted them. And
Yeah,
some of them are positive, like a surprise party. Whoa, thanks very much. And some are negative.
yeah. Well, in the negative category, I think of getting a bad prognosis, yeah, medical prognosis telling you that the end is near, something like that. So that's certainly a kind of surprise. And uh, pregnancy can be a surprise to one or both partners. And yeah, so surprise is getting fired is another kind of surprise. But you're interested in another kind of surprise, one that changes belief. So tell us about that kind of surprise. What's different about that?
Well, a surprise is belief based. You can't be surprised unless you have a belief. So every belief you can be surprised about external events that happen outside you. For instance, if you looked outside now, David, and you saw a panda walking across your lawn, you'd be surprised.
I
But you're only
definitely would.
surprised. But you're only surprised because you believe pandas don't belong where you live. And
Right.
so it's all surprises are belief based. And
Yeah.
but go ahead.
Yeah. Just to fill out a little based on what I read in your book, it has to do with our mental maps of the world, and so uh, we have expectancies that can get violated. If a panda walked across my yard right now, well, that doesn't fit into any mental map that I have. So go on.
Right, and that's why it's hard to surprise children because they haven't the young children they haven't yet formed beliefs. For instance,
Uh-huh.
if you have a 5-year-old grandchild and she looks outside and she sees a panda, she'll be delighted. Oh, look at the big bear! But she wasn't surprised because she hasn't yet formed a belief, that mental map that you're talking about.
Uh-huh.
So we have these mental maps, our sets of beliefs, the way we understand the world, and we fit into it. And we're surprised when something doesn't go the way we expect or the way we predict, the way we go about our life. Now, those kinds of surprises, we always look for evidence. For instance, if you saw that panda walking across your lawn, that would surprise you. and you'd go around looking for evidence. You'd run outside to see, was that really a panda or somebody dressed up like a panda? What the hell's a panda doing on my lawn?
Yeah.
And that would
Uh,
just stay top of mind until you figured that out. If you went for coffee with a friend later on, you'd say, guess what I saw? A panda. And that would just stay on top of your mind until you figured it out or sorted it out.
I would try all kinds of things. I mean, I'd look to see, is there a circus in town? Then I'd have to check with my neighbors. One of my neighbors have a panda that I didn't know about that got loose. I'd probably call the police department, right? To find some way to rationalize it. And as you point out in your book, this makes our minds more, it saves us a certain amount of energy to be able to run our lives based on things being in expected ways and places and so on. That lets us conserve a lot of our mental energy. But at the same time, we're fine-tuned to notice anything that jars that. And then we try to rationalize it if we can.
Well, we have to form a new belief. So now you have to believe pandas exist in my hometown, or let's you hear the evening news, and there was an exotic animal farm truck transporting animals, and the latch broke, and all these exotic animals came, and there was a tiger and a panda and a cobra, and you're just happy it was the panda that was in your backyard.
Yeah.
And then you have your resolution, and now you can go about your life, and now it makes for an interesting story, and your beliefs.
Yeah. So it was an interesting story, but no big deal. And so I slip right back into my regular life patterns.
Right. Well, those stories make those surprises make fascinating stories. Those aren't the ones that I study. The ones I study we also get surprises to our self-esteem, to how we understand ourselves. And so, for instance, if I get a surprise, it stays top of mind until I can resolve that surprise, just like you, it stays top of mind until it resolves your surprise. And so a surprise to your self-esteem, the resolution is actually confirmation bias. It's when in order to resolve a surprise about myself, my mind does this internal Google search. For instance, for example, let me give you an example, because that always works best, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Some of the examples that I use in my TED Talk were this Lori. She was a teenager, and she thought she was odd looking, a little gangly and unattractive. And then she overheard a friend of her aunt, who was an exotic dancer, describe Lori as exotic looking and actually very attractive. Now she overheard that, and it surprised her. Now, how do you confirm that surprise? It changed her beliefs. Oh, I'm exotic looking. Oh yes, I'm attractive. And she recalls that as a pivotal time in her life where all of a sudden things were different for her. She embraced those differences that she had, and she thought that made her exotic looking. And of course, if you feel exotic looking, and then you're going to carry yourself with confidence, and you're going to see those casual glances that people send your way as confirmation, because you have this mindset now, and your mindset drives your belief. So when people look at me, they're seeing a beautiful exotic creature, not this ungangly, odd-looking person.
Yeah, and you point out that she may become part of her self-image that she'll carry with her the rest of her life, and so the belief can be changed in a moment, and you're very intrigued with that process, enough to keep you busy for 30 years exploring that dynamic. And the subtitle of your book, we didn't I didn't read out. It's how your brain secretly changes your beliefs. So the secretly suggests that a surprise, like the example that you gave, may be beneath the level of consciousness. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking that maybe it also can work in reverse. Do we sometimes hear things said about us that are negative, maybe also strike us with surprising impact if it's something that we were never aware of about ourselves?
Right. So when you say reverse, you mean can it form a negative belief about ourselves?
Exactly.
It's very destructive. Absolutely. And so let me just backtrack a little bit, because for the last 30 years, I haven't been studying surprise. For 30 years, I was intrigued with formative moments that changed you. Somebody said something,
Yeah.
or an event happened that changed how you felt about yourself. So I collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories. And many of your viewers probably read some of the Chicken Soup for Soul series. And those are all short little essays about moments that changed people's lives. So I studied these and collected these, and I wrote about that in a prior book called Sudden Influence: How Spontaneous Events Shape Our Lives.
Yeah.
And then, so I kept on collecting these. And then one day I'm reading through my stories, collecting them and doing my content analysis. And I had a little epiphany. What? Most of the stories of moments that changed people happened during a surprise event. So I thought, is surprise a catalyst for formative moments?
Yeah.
For the last 5 or 6, it's actually 7 years now. For the last 7 years, I've been devoting my study exclusively to the study of surprise as a revision reflex, a cognitive revision reflex. And I've found some fascinating information on surprise in the neurosciences and cognition.
Well, hopefully we will get into that. But I wanted to, in the book's introduction, you tell us a story of how you first became interested in surprise-induced belief change. And it began with an interest in hypnosis. Now, my eyes perked up at that mention because of a long-standing interest in hypnosis myself. But your story was like really very dramatic and interesting. So first of all, tell us about the thing that sparked you when you saw a hypnosis demonstration, I guess, and you noticed something that really caught that maybe was the beginning of this quest.
Well, when I was a young man, I went for an entertainment show, and it was a hypnotist. And I watched the hypnotist change these people's beliefs, and they would have these incredible behaviors. They would, it was warm, but they would think they were in the Arctic, and they'd start to shiver. And most of your listeners have probably seen all sorts of hypnosis shows or have an idea of how that works.
Yeah.
They've got their mental map. So I thought, fascinating. I'm going to do that. I was intrigued by this. I thought, I'm going to become a hypnotist and maybe do these kinds of things too. So, and of course, this is long before the internet. So I gathered a whole bunch of books, how to become a hypnotist, and I studied it and I learned. And then I'm pretty much a doer. If I have an idea, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it a try. Yeah. So I went about, and who are you going to hypnotize? It's the same as if you're an insurance salesman. You're going to go to your friends, your family, and you have to start hypnotizing everybody and anybody. So I started doing that, and I started to learn the craft of hypnosis. And at the time, I was a middle school teacher. So I thought, I am surrounded all day by these young students. Why don't I hypnotize them? Now it sounds crazy, and I'm certainly not recommending it to their teachers who are listening to your show. And I'm not an idiot. I wrote a letter to all the parents and said, hey, I'm practicing hypnosis, and I think it's an interesting subject. Is it okay if I hypnotize your students? I won't do it in the class. I'll do it after school hours. And here's some of the things I'm going to do. And I will make sure that everybody that I hypnotize remembers everything, and you can respond. And all the parents said, sure, go ahead. They even said something like, hey, can you get my son to take out the garbage? Can you get my daughter to clean her room?
That sounds like that was a more interesting, a more innocent time than we're in right now.
Oh, yes.
I don't think you would get, you were up in Canada, right? And I'm not sure you'd get that down. I don't know how it is in Canada, but you would not get that permission today.
No, but this was 35, 40 years ago. So, and I was a member of a small community, and it was a Catholic school, and all the parents knew me and trusted me. So it worked out. And so I hypnotized. So I started just to develop the craft and get good at it. And, and then I would go to parties, and people would say, hey, Mike, hypnotize people. It's always fun at parties. So I hypnotize people and get them to do crazy little things. And then people would ask me, hey, Mike, what if you hypnotize somebody and they never came out of it? Or can you hypnotize somebody and they didn't know? And I thought, why don't I go to the University of Oregon, do a PhD and study that?
Yeah.
It wasn't as simple as that, but that's the short.
Yeah, that's
short
how
version.
it ended up.
So I went to the University of Oregon, studied it, and wrote my dissertation on. It was entitled "Hypnotic Conditions in the Classroom," and basically, I was intrigued by the idea of hypnotic conditions are everywhere, and there's got to be a faster path. I wanted to study hypnotic susceptibility, and there's got to be a fast path to when are people most susceptible, because hypnosis is a very natural phenomenon, as you know. There's nothing magical about it. It's a natural phenomenon. It's a way to raise somebody's susceptibility to suggestion so that they believe something temporarily and act as if it were true. So I thought, I want to develop a way to do it fast track. And so that got me into, I started collecting stories about people and how their lives changed or how belief changed in a moment. And then, 25 years later, it came to surprise, which is a surprise neurologically and cognitively is a fast track to belief, instant belief formation.
Okay, let me have you go deeper into the story that really intrigued me, because somebody suggested to you, well, maybe you should think about becoming a chiropractor. Chiropractors use hypnosis. Now, I had never heard anything like that about chiropractors, but you took a course, evidently, from a chiropractor and saw some amazing stuff. So take us through that, because that seems like that was such a pivotal point in your life.
It was. So I'm studying this now. This is before I did my PhD. So I'm still dabbling with hypnosis, and my hypnosis instructor, I had a hypnosis instructor, said, hey, there's this chiropractor who comes to town who practices hypnosis, who's just magical with his work. And when I say chiropractors use hypnosis, I'm mostly thinking that chiropractors use the power of suggestion very strategically. And so I was looking at it as when you're in a doctor's office or when you're with a chiropractor, they can, because of your hyper alertness, what's happening, you're surrendering somewhat to your chiropractor or your physician, in this case, a chiropractor. You're surrendering, waiting for them to say or do or tell you something so that you can consume it. And so during the chiropractic weekend, where we were learning about chiropractic medicine, at the end, we were all promised a neck adjustment. And so at the end, we all practiced this, and then the chiropractor would take everybody's head and just slowly manipulate it and go, and you hear this.
Yeah, that always made me very nervous. A few times I've had that experience of the whoop, relax, 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 whoop.
It scared the heck out of me. So I was going to go last, and I was thinking, do I really want to do this? Can I sneak out to the bathroom or something?
Oh, yeah.
Because like you, I was very apprehensive about this. And but when it came to my turn, and he'd always say, when you do that quick snap crack, he'd always say something really positive, and that intrigued me. Like, wow, this person is going to be a great physician, or this person has a magical touch. And I think, well, I wonder what he's going to say about me. Because what he would do is, before he would do his snap crack, he would feel the back of your head and say, oh yeah, I can feel this. I can feel intelligence here. I can feel, smart, or not smart, but critical thinking here. And you feel these elements. And so I finally went up there, and he was doing his little manipulations and reading my face and looking at things and saying, and then he went snap crack, and he said, yeah, this is a person who will always exceed and thrive. Outside appearances dictate.
Yeah.
Boom. And I thought, and that moment was pivotal for me, because I didn't think I was thriving. I didn't think I was excelling. And, but all of a sudden I had this new mindset. Yes, I can thrive. And so, and shortly after that,
part of it was exceed people's expectations, right?
Exceed people's expectations of how I looked.
Yeah.
And I thought, I was just an ordinary guy. I was struggling. I struggled in school because I had learning disabilities. I couldn't write I couldn't write a sentence without a spelling error or without grammatical errors. And, things were going well for me in my life. They were going badly, but now I had this mindset. I just had this drive, this ability, and in every aspect of my life, I seem to have thrived and succeeded, and I feel very lucky. And then I thought, this is mindset driven. He changed that belief in a moment. I need to know how to do that, and that was a precursor for my study in doing my PhD. I wanted to know, what was it that happened, and can I duplicate that?
I have to wonder, as a clinician, I have to wonder why belief and belief change was a hot topic for you. Do you have any sense of that? Is there something in your upbringing or your past that caused you to hone in on belief and belief change so keenly?
That's a great question, and I'm sure when the show's over, I'll have some really good answers. but for right now, there's so many things that come to mind. But one of them was when I was in high school, and because I had learning disabilities, I had 2 learning disabilities. And so I'm in high school, and I've struggled all my life with learning, and I'm just barely passing. And my last year of high school, a teacher, a substitute teacher comes in, and it's a health class. So here we are, 30 seniors, boys, with a substitute teacher who we knew. He was the phys ed teacher, came in as an internal sub. So we knew him. And he said, all right, all you boys sit down. And, he didn't have any lesson plan or anything. He said, so let's everybody sit there. And okay, what's everybody going to do when they're finished high school? And so, I don't know. So we just dismissed and moved about, just chatted amongst ourselves. And of course, he's a phys ed teacher, and this is back in the 60s. And he said, all right, everybody, I want you to be serious, because he wants to try to control the class. And, as a teacher, one of the mechanisms for controlling a class is often to pick on somebody and make an example of them. So he looked at me and he says, Rousell, what are you going to do? What are you going to do after school when you graduate? And I said, oh, I don't know. I'll get a job. I'll do something. And, and then I turned around and started talking to my friends again. And he said, no, Rousell, I'm serious. What are you going to do when you finish high school? Stand up, Rousell.
Oh, boy.
So I'm standing up in front of all my peers.
Yeah, big pressure.
And just all of a sudden, it happened. It's still hard for me to talk about it, but I had almost this psychic break. It was like, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the radios. I'm going to go to the TV. I'm going to go to the newspapers, and I'm going to tell everybody what's really going on in this school. It's like a prison. You line up, you sit down, you do this, you do that. Nobody ever cares about you. It's just like a prison. It's a horrible place, and I'm going to expose it.
Wow.
And I'm just frothing, right? And he looks at me, which is, I've never done this before, right? And he looks at me and says, oh, that's interesting. Well, the only way you're going to do any change of any value is if you do it from the inside. You're going to have to become a teacher. And then he turned and he started talking to the next person. Vibrating, right? And so here I am, right? So I ended up in education. It didn't happen overnight, right? But he set the seed there.
Yeah.
Right? Set that seed. I have to reach people. After several years of failing university and failing classes, one of my mother-in-law said, hey, why don't you become a teacher? I thought, lights went on, went into education, became a teacher for 20 years, and it was right.
Yeah, yeah. So
it was a surprise, Clement.
Yeah, it was a surprise. So you got very interested in belief, and talk to us a bit about the neuroscience of what we know about belief and how it gets set and established. You said that there'd been a lot of activity in the last 7 or 8 years, and be interested to hear, what's been the cutting edge stuff that's caught your attention.
Oh, well, all right. We know that belief, once you have belief, you act out according to that belief. Let me just give a simple definition of what I think a belief is and how I think a mindset, because it's the mindsets and beliefs, how they work together, that I'm really interested in. So I see a belief as a constellation, representation of the pattern of the way we understand the world. So, if things happen to us, our brain makes patterns so that we can predict what's going to happen to us next, how we can be safe, and those become beliefs. So we have a belief. And then the mindset is, once we have a belief, we have a predisposition to act in accordance with that belief, or think or perceive according to the belief. So that's our mindset. So, for instance, if you have a belief that vaccinations are good, your mindset is going to, I will endorse vaccinations. I'll go get one. If you have a belief that vaccinations are bad, then you're predisposed to think and act and see evidence that supports it. So your mindset basically is, the belief is the filter and your mindset's the action. And that's how I view beliefs and mindsets.
Okay.
So now what intrigued me about, with that basis, I found out that dopamine is our motivation to act, and dopamine's base is related to our mindsets. Let me give you an example. For instance, let's say you're a 6-year-old boy, and you're in a math class, or not, you're just not in a math class. You're a 6-year-old boy and you're in elementary school, and you're looking at this little math problem, maybe addition or subtraction or something, and you can't quite get it right. So you get confused. And the teacher walks by and the teacher says, "Oh, you're sure confused." She looks concerned. And so now, oh, I feel confused, right? She's named this feeling I have as confused. And but let's just back that up a little bit. Now that you're confused, your dopamine level, your motivation to do math is dropped a little bit, right? Because dopamine that we have in our body that moves slowly, it fluctuates according to our motivation. So let's back that up a bit. Let's say the little boy is working on a math problem and he's confused, and the teacher walks by and the teacher says, "Oh, wow, the way you stick with the problem is the sure signs of a clever learner." Oh, now confusion with math makes me a clever learner. So it motivates me now to do math, even when I'm confused, because I'm a little motivated, because my dopamine level motivates me to say, "You're confused. Well, try harder. You're confused. Try harder. You'll get there." To the boy who was confused, who was struggling, "You sure struggle with math." Oh, every time he sees math, dopamine drops a little bit. So dopamine is your motivation. So you have a belief, and your dopamine motivation fluctuates according to your belief. So in a surprise is what's called phasic dopamine. And Wolfgang Schultz out of Cambridge got the brain prize for that with his colleagues in 2017, partly for figuring out how surprise works and what happens with phasic dopamine. So we have what's called tonic dopamine. That's the fluctuation level. For instance, if you go to a restaurant and it looks dirty, your dopamine level is going to drop a little bit. I'm not going to go to that one. You go to another restaurant and the food menu looks great and you get excited. So your dopamine level rises a little bit. Now you're interested in going. So with phasic dopamine, that's totally different. In a surprise is essentially a neurological error statement. What you believe is not true. When you saw that panda, it was like, what? That was an error statement. I don't expect pandas. That's a burst of dopamine, phasic dopamine saying, stop, pay attention, something's going on. Is it dangerous or is it an opportunity? Because that's how surprise evolved. Surprises in our evolutionary past, moments of imminent danger or immense opportunity. And if you stop to think about it, well, those genes didn't get passed on. So you perished. So in phasic dopamine, we have this predisposition to learn instantly when surprised. So now when phasic surprise happens with bang, in a few milliseconds, that's what they call salience. It says, stop what you're doing, pay close attention. There's something important to learn here. And then that part of the dopamine just fizzles away. And what you're left with is the slow acting dopamine that says, make a new belief. Is this good or bad? If it's bad, avoid. If it's good, approach. And so dopamine drives our mindset after a surprise. So for instance, if we look back at Lori, who was overheard her aunt's friend saying she was exotic looking, that surprised her. Phase, bang. Phase 1, something really important just happened. Phase 2, learn. Oh, I'm exotic looking. Oh, and that creates a mindset, the new belief. And the mindset is, I'm exotic looking. And I will see people looking at me and endorsing how attractive I am. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Now, a lot of your work has been around, you're saying, well, we can take charge of this process in the brain, and we can create a brain hack. I think you use that term, to engineer for good, for positive mental health reasons and so on. We can use this in education, in the world of business, as a supervisor of people working underneath us, that we can learn to be very skillful use. So take us there and tell us, about the skillful use of this insight and how we can become skillful users of it, if you will.
Right. And yeah, if it was just the study of surprise, it would be interesting. But what I've found is there are strategic uses. And so who uses surprises? Comedians use surprise. If you look at the writers use surprise in novels all the time. And if producers and directors, we're all surprised when Darth Vader told Luke he was his father,
What?
So, we're surrounded by surprise. Some of the best commercials you've seen on TV are surprises. And Super Bowl, watch Super Bowl commercials, and it's basically like watching an episode of Surprises. And they use surprises a lot. If you watch any of those fun shows, those like America's Got Talent or The Voice, and they do these interviews, and it looks like, well, this person isn't going to do well, and then all of a sudden they're great. And so what we do know about surprises is surprise is initially felt as negative because it's a disruption. And it's like, what? Even a positive surprise is initially felt as a disruption, and then the emotion that follows, if it's a good surprise, is emphasized.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you expect your friend to show up at the coffee shop and he walks in, you're pleasant, you're happy. But if you thought that friend was in Europe and suddenly showed up at your dinner party, you're even going to be more excited because that was a pleasant surprise. And surprises tend to emphasize the emotions that follow. I'm going to jump right out there and say, I don't think surprise is an emotion. Surprise is a neurological error signal that emphasizes the emotion that follows.
Yeah.
So how can we manipulate that? So I studied all those people who use surprise strategically, and I thought I need to develop something here to make it useful. So I developed what something's called a CERS, cause, effect, resource statement. If you want to surprise somebody strategically, do anything they don't expect. That's pretty clear. So, but let me give you an example, and then we can break it down. I think that it might be easiest that way. So let's just say you're a supervisor, and so you notice that one of your employees isn't learning her protocols very quickly. So you call her into your office. Now here's the from the employee's point of view, she thinks she doesn't learn her protocols very quickly. So she gets called into the supervisor's office. And then when she gets called in, she's going to be nervous.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in trouble. Yeah.
Am I going to get fired? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And the supervisor says, wow, the way you learn your protocols so thoroughly sure makes you a valued employee. I just wanted to say it. Go have a nice day. Boom. Wow, right? So she expected to be condemned or ridiculed or fired or some kind of comment. All of a sudden she's getting, whoa, I learned my protocols thoroughly. So what he did was he twisted learn your protocols too slowly to learn them thoroughly. So now what's her mindset when she leaves? Her mindset is, oh, I learned them thoroughly. So now when she's going to learn her protocols for whatever she's doing on the floor or in her job, she's going to learn them thoroughly. That's her mindset. She's going to do it confidently and thoroughly. Now, and here's the secret part, because the second half of my book is The Power of Surprise, how your brain secretly changes your belief. If you were to ask that employee, so when did you start learning your protocols thoroughly? She wouldn't know. As far as she knows, she's always done it thoroughly. Because once you change a belief, it's really hard to remember that time and connect with that time when you didn't have that belief. Now she believes she's always had those protocols, and she's learned them slowly, but now she thinks she learns them quickly, and now she does it confidently.
Yeah, this set me to thinking about the range of circumstances in which people change their beliefs. And I don't know that they all involve surprise. You've indicated that, we know that education can affect people's self-image and their sense of their potential. And some teachers are gifted at evoking that. I'm married to one who has all kinds of turnarounds and amazed parents. How did you do that? I had such a difficult child. Nobody liked teaching my child, and now my child wants to come to your classes all the time, and just a complete turnaround. So there are lots of circumstances, and my mind even goes to things like PTSD talk about instant learning or one-time learning. And PTSD is certainly a strong example of that, where when the nervous system gets completely overwhelmed, then one of the things that can happen is that, there's a lot of negative stuff that can follow in the wake of that. And certainly one's beliefs about their efficacy, about the safety of the world, is profoundly changed. Then I think of religious conversions, which often have a kind of peak experience, maybe that goes along with a religious conversion. And I suspect that has a profound effect in the brain. So there are parallel processes here. I'm also thinking of Milton Erickson. Did you study his work at all?
I did, and I liked a lot of Milton Erickson's work. He was the master at inducing susceptibility in the patients he worked with.
Yeah, and he would confound people by giving them assignments or doing things that they totally were not expecting. And it seems to me that fits in your paradigm really well. One of the stories that I sort of hazily remember was wife was complaining that her husband never paid attention to her, particularly sexually, didn't seem to have any level of excitement anymore. And he told her to go get a squirt gun. And at this strategic moment, I don't know, he's watching TV or something like that, she's supposed to approach him, squirt him with a squirt gun, and then run away into the bedroom. And so he's initially, shocked and surprised, and then is able to shift into this more playful mode and chase her into the bedroom, and interesting things happen. So he's got tons of stories like that. And so I think maybe emotional arousal is very important.
Right.
And we're seeing that in psychotherapy. You're not a psychotherapist. You're more of a researcher in terms of your training and orientation. So I don't know if you're aware that there's been a lot of work on memory reconsolidation, discovery that at a neural level that memories can be reprogrammed. And part of that is that it's got to be accompanied by emotion. That emotion, strong feeling, is part of that change process. And so we have emotion-focused therapy, a lot of interest in experiential therapies, where it's not just talking about it and having a cognitive understanding of something, but that it's at key points, somehow emotion gets triggered, and at that point, change is really possible. So all of this, I think, supports your basic approach.
Yeah, yes, and you're correct. I've developed mostly in the field of theory. I was practicing for a while, and then when I went back to do my PhD and do some work, and then after that, it was here and there and everywhere and then I became an academic at one point, and so that became focused on research. But if you look at some of the psychology models, I know that with people who have phobias, and you treat phobias with what's the name of that model where they just immerse them? I think it's called immersion therapy.
Yeah.
So immersion therapy, let's, for instance, that you say that you have this horrible fear of cats. And I have a friend who has a horrible fear of cats, and if she wanted to get over it, you'd have immersion therapy where you'd show a picture of a cat, and then
gradually work your way up to
gradually work
something
your way up
extreme.
to going to the animal shelter and walking into a room, walking into the room with all the cats in there, and basically immersion therapy is based on surprise. Now you wouldn't think of it. But the whole idea of immersion therapy is you're surprised that you survived the encounter. You're surprised that you're just fine after that. So it's based on when you immerse somebody, they expect the worst, and when the worst doesn't happen, well, there's that cognitive dissonance. What do I do now? Well, you survived. So the whole theory of immersion therapy is based on I survived, and they don't expect to. And so there's a lot. Now I haven't finished. There's still so much more to study, as you know. Yeah. But I absolutely totally agree. If you're going to change anything, any kind of beliefs. You change the beliefs at the emotional level. If someone, because we hold our beliefs as if they're a piece of our identity.
Right.
And we see that playing out right now with during the COVID crisis. People have very firm beliefs, and they just play out because that's part of their identity, and their identity is wrapped up in part of their group identity too.
Yeah.
And so because your conviction, while belief is this static thing, your conviction of belief is actually an emotion.
Well, I wonder if there's anything more that you want to say that we haven't touched on. That.
Well, yes, I think there's an important point here. There's lots of ways to use surprise strategically. And, for instance, you as a therapist, when someone is saying something and they're feeling sorry for themselves, so like, for instance, I've used it in therapy when someone say, well, I don't adapt very well. And I don't think I have the attention to detail in order to adapt. And I'll laugh, and they don't expect the laugh.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell them, so the laugh. So that's phase one of the phase. They said, what just happened? He laughed. And the phase two is that's when you say a very healing comment, such as, your adaptability is off the charts. The way and then you just describe one simple sentence about how that adaptability for them works, because that's what you're doing right now in this very office. And that little pause, that surprise. So the strategic laugh, saying just doing something that's unexpected creates a momentary window for you to say something that can have a powerful effect. Now that can be positive or negative, of course, but hopefully we're therapists here, and your listeners are positive, or they wouldn't be listening to your show. So use it for the good.
Yeah.
Right, because there aren't no criminals or those with evil intent who listen to your show. I'm sure.
I hope not. We never know. We never know.
And the last point I think is when you use surprise strategically, is never explain it. Don't say what you did or don't explain why it works. One of the ways surprise works is the recipient of the surprise has to make sense of it themselves. So when, for instance, when Lori was surprised about her being exotic looking, there was nobody to explain to her, oh, it's the way you carry your body, the way you dress. Nobody. It was like, oh, and she had to make sense of it. Yeah, I guess I am exotic looking. And in the act of making sense of it, it's called elaboration. So people, when they have to think about making sense of a comment, that making sense actually embeds it into long-term memory and embeds it into a belief in a mindset that moves forward. So when you explain how cleverly you used surprise or what you meant by that comment that is intended to help them produce a productive belief, you actually diminish it. So no explanations.
Right, right. To just a short declarative statement that they can chew on for the rest of their lives, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you, Dr. Michael Rousell, for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio. And you've given us something to think about, and we'll chew on it.
Great. Hey, thank you very much for inviting me, and it was a pleasure being on the show. It was wonderful to meet you, David.